Welcome to Sketchbook Legends. I'm your artist, Paul Hostetler. Today we're drawing Victorian sideshow celebrity Joseph Merrick, also known as the Elephant Man. Now, my first exposure to the Elephant Man was, in all places, a Calvin and Hobbes comic. There's a daily strip where Calvin's decided that he's going to make a gross face for long enough that his face sticks that way. And in order to appease his parents at the dinner table, he throws a pillowcase over his head and calls himself the Elephant Man. Problem solved. I think this led to me asking my dad, who was the Elephant Man? And he told me, if I can remember correctly from back when I was 7, he told me that the Elephant Man was a guy who had severe deformities, so that if he ever lay down, he would die. And one day he just got super tired and wanted to take a comfortable nap, so he laid down knowing that he would die. And man, that burned itself right into my 7-year-old brain. But Wikipedia wasn't around at that time, so I kind of forgot about Joseph Merrick until a while later. In college, the second exposure I had to the Elephant Man was the graphic novel From Hell by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell. In the graphic novel, which is about Jack the Ripper visits Joseph Merrick in the hospital, in the London Royal Hospital, and does a little speech about how in India he happens to know that the god Ganesh is an elephant-headed deity, and someone with his disabilities, his deformities, might be worshipped as an avatar of Ganesh. And later on, Jack the Ripper dedicates his first murder to Ganesh. It's kind of gross, but it does, I think, an unparalleled job of portraying Victorian London as this sordid, extremely socially stratified kind of place. And I know that actual Victorian London is not anything like we see in the movies or the comic books. For example, they really, really liked both horror stories and erotica, even if the latter had to be sold under the table sometimes. But in homage to From Hell, Eddie Campbell, and Victorian-era London, I've decided to do my drawing of Joseph Merrick using a quill pen and India ink, trying to give it sort of a copperplate etching sort of feel, a little bit of the grubby griminess of Victorian London, which had entered the industrial age. They're always talking about the fog of London. That's actually industrial smoke, smog that's coating the entire city. It was not a healthy place to live. Past From Hell, though, my next exposure to the Elephant Man was just a few weeks ago. I finally watched David Lynch's movie, The Elephant Man, produced by Mel Brooks, of all people. And what I'm drawing here is closer to what Joseph Merrick actually looked like, and less like what John Hurt looked like in the movie. They did an extraordinary job with the makeup, but I could still tell pretty much the whole time that it was a guy with normal facial features wearing a bunch of prosthetics. If you ever see photographs of Joseph Merrick, there's things wrong with his skeleton that you just cannot do with foam padding. They did the best they could. After Joseph Merrick died, the London hospital people made a life cast of his head, and that's what David Lynch used to create the prosthetics for William Hurt. I've got to say, it was a very touching movie. And it didn't hurt that he used actual Victorian locations. He filmed, I think, in 1979 or 1980. This was right before Thatcher took over, or maybe right after Thatcher took over. There were still a few streets in London that hadn't been torn down and renovated, and still had the buildings and the facades from back in the 1880s, 1890s. He used those for a couple of exterior shots, the alleyway where Joseph Merrick lives at the beginning of the movie. That's not a set. That's what parts of London actually looked like right up till 1980. He got access to a Victorian-era hospital that was on the verge of being renovated. He does amazing things with that. It's got open gas lamps. You're not used to seeing a hospital with just fire shooting out of the walls, but I guess that's how it really was. And it's, a testament to Lynch himself that this was only his second movie. I should note that the Elephant Man movie was scripted by Chris DeVore and Eric Berggren, and that in the movie, the character's name is John Merrick, not Joseph Merrick. This is mostly, I think, the writers were pulling from the book that Joseph Merrick's doctor wrote. It's Dr. Frederick Treves wrote a book about the Elephant Man after he died, in which he gets a lot of basic facts wrong. For example, his first name. Joseph Merrick's first name is Joseph. All throughout Treves' book, he calls him John. No one's really sure why. On the part of Lynch and the filmmakers, I like to believe they went with John just to separate the human being, Joseph Merrick, from the character in their Hollywood movie, John Merrick. Because the movie The Elephant Man does have a Hollywood structure. It's not true to life. The changes they made in chronology, I think, work in its favor. Right after I saw the movie, I started doing my own research, mostly online. There are a couple of books written about Joe Merrick. There's a biographical comic book, I think either Belgian or French, about Joseph Merrick growing up and how he started out as a normal kid. He didn't get these deformities until he was a little bit older. And when you know that, it becomes a little bit more depressing, because these things clearly were always going to be the death of him. The real Joseph Merrick was born in, let me try and pronounce this. It's spelled Leicester, but it's probably pronounced Leicester. Just the same as Worcestershire sauce is pronounced Worcestershire. And as I said, he was apparently a normal kid. His mom died when he was 11. One of the reasons he's called the Elephant Man is because I guess she was frightened by an elephant in a circus while pregnant, and people back in those days believed that if anything happened to the pregnant woman, it would be reflected in the child. So a lady frightened by an elephant makes an elephant man. But it didn't, because he was a normal kid until he started growing the scabby skin and bony tumors on his head and back and arms. And those just continued growing. His mom died when he was 11. He went to live with his uncle. And then at the age of 17, he left that home. And the only work that he could find, being not quite as deformed as I'm portraying him, but probably still kind of messed up looking, was in a Victorian workhouse. And if you know anything about Victorian workhouses, they're basically prisons where you can come and go. You do labor in exchange for pennies. At one point, workhouses were considered charity. By Joseph Merrick's era, they were considered pretty much punishment. As in, if we make the workhouses horrible enough, people will simply choose not to be poor and not to be forced to go to the workhouse. That's the kind of workhouse that Joseph Merrick found work in until he was 22. That's 5 years doing the shittiest job imaginable. At 22, he gets himself a manager and starts selling himself as a sideshow with a traveling circus. And that proved to be his lucky year, I guess, because that's the year that the real-life Frederick Treves found him and decided to display him nude to a bunch of his buddies in the Pathological Society of London. I'm guessing that Joseph Merrick got paid for that appearance also. But it's kind of important to note that becoming a sideshow freak was Joseph Merrick's choice, as in it was a better career option than continuing on in the workhouse. Freak shows, horror stories were very popular in the Victorian era. He was touring Europe with his troupe. He made friends with the little people who would help him with bullies, because by this point, Joseph Merrick couldn't really talk. He even had surgery, like this is post-surgery. He had surgery around his mouth so that he could, move his tongue around in a way where he could maybe make some sounds that sounded like words. And even so, it was apparently really hard to understand anything that he was saying, just because of his mouth wasn't the normal shape. Anyway, in 1886, 2 years on the road, his manager steals all of his money and abandons him in Belgium. And by all his money, that was $50, which in today's money is around $7,000, which is not a lot, but it's more than most people have in their checking account. So that sucks for him in a long line of things sucking for this poor Joe Merrick. One more thing. Fortunately, he made his way back to England. He's contracted tuberculosis from having to sleep on sidewalks and stuff. The only thing he has, the only identification he has, is Frederick Treves' card. So he calls Frederick Treves. The police throw him in a cab, takes him to the hospital. And over the next few months, there's a big foo-for-ah where the hospital decides that, yes, even though they're not really set up for it, they can take him on as a full-time, incurable patient. They basically give him an apartment in the hospital, and Frederick Treves becomes a friend. I think mostly because he's the only one who spent enough time with Joseph Merrick that he could understand what he was saying. Merrick managed to live the rest of his life in relative comfort. He made like little dollhouse kits in his spare time. He liked to read. He would take walks after dark. He had a hood on that he would wear so as not to freak people out. Treves took him to a Christmas pantomime. Apparently, every Christmas, it's, a thing where every Christmas English people will go see this, a theater production, and it's the same production every year, and it's like for kids. And he'd never been to one of these, so it was like, wow, for him. A lot of rich and famous people became interested in his cause. One of them paid for him to have a private train car out to Northampton, England, where he got to wander around the estate of this summer estate of this wealthy lady. I think it's quite touching that in the middle of this, he was still dreaming. He wasn't ever like, well, this is the best that life can be for me, Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man. He was always thinking, how could this be better? How can I take advantage of this moment of security and calm and improve my lot? And one of his dreams was eventually to live in a hospital for the blind. He thought he could maybe find a blind wife who wouldn't be freaked out by his deformities. I don't know that it occurred to him that a blind wife wouldn't necessarily be able to understand what he was saying, but I guess he figured he had a better chance with a blind woman. It's sort of like Ben Grimm's girlfriend, if you know. The Fantastic Four, Ben Grimm is the giant orange rock-covered guy. And he has a blind girlfriend, Alicia, in the comics. And they make it work. Joseph Merrick died in 1890 at the age of 27. So all of that happened before he turned 30. He died in the hospital, in his sleep apparently. And no one to this day actually knows what caused his deformities. People have tried diagnosing him. They tried diagnosing him back in the day. But obviously, Victorian medicine was practically magic back then. They didn't even necessarily know about germs, depending on which hospital you were going to. And even though the hospital kept his bones, we can't use modern DNA tracing or, spectrography or anything, modern methods on the bones because they've been bleached so many times because they were put on display in the Royal London Hospital. Not for public display. I guess you have to make an appointment and have a valid reason to see Joseph Merrick's bones. But that's still kind of messed up that this guy's been considered a freak his whole life and, eventually tried to make a good life for himself, being a freak. Died, and, even in rest, even in death, he's still on display for people. It should be said that only the bones are on display. They took the rest of him somehow, and they buried him in the City of London Cemetery. Leicester, England, made a concerted effort to get his bones sent over to them to be buried on his home ground. But I think that fell by the wayside once they learned that, his mushy bits had already been given a proper burial. And so as, one last little tribute to both Joseph Merrick and David Lynch, who was my gateway into learning more about the Elephant Man finally. I have him sans hood, sans mask, out on the town like a normal person, like any one of us can be, and he's going to the movie theater to buy a ticket for Inland Empire, David Lynch's least popular, least commercially successful, and least understandable movie. I think it's the sort of thing that normal folks consider a privilege, to go out and see bizarre movies that they know walking in they may not actually like. It's good to remember that many people don't necessarily have those privileges. There's a difference between human rights and human privileges, and in the climax of the movie is when Merrick finally stands up for himself in front of a crowd and yells out, "I am not an animal, I am a man," deserving of human rights, implied. But he also knows, as do we all, that he's never going to have the privileges that come with being not different in that way. It's my personal view, and it always boggles me that this isn't a more popular view. That human rights mean that these privileges should be extended as wide as possible. And, I just wanted to give the Elephant Man, Mr. Merrick, a little moment of privilege in that regard. Going out to a movie. And I also wanted David Lynch, also now deceased, to feel that at least one person bought a ticket to see Inland Empire. And that's Joseph Merrick, known in media as the Elephant Man. If you liked this video, click the like button. If you want more, that's more drawings, not more elephant men, click subscribe. I have a Patreon, a Ko-Fi, and a Blue Sky account, all at phostetlerart. That's my handle. Links in the description. This is all I have for you today, so stay sketching, stay legendary, and see you next time.